in 1493, and we have a map as late as of Richmond, which was published in 2007 or 2008. And so we are collecting maps from the colonial period up to the present day, up to the present day. So we are actively collecting maps. But when it comes to genealogy, it's surprising how you can use maps, or maybe not, to you folks in GRIVA, because you guys are um, very seasoned researchers. And let me see if I can go to the next screen here. Okay. And so what I wanted to spend tonight doing is just talking about why maps are critical to genealogical research, discussing how to read a map, how a map is broken up per se, but how to read a map, and also look at some government maps, government produced maps that you could use for your research. There is a second part to this presentation that I've given before, which covers county maps, commercial maps, Sanborn maps, and I would be happy to meet with you guys for another session if you desire to do that, to go over those types of maps and how they can be used. But to start off with, let's answer this question: why maps are critical to genealogical research? And for one, they're a visual image of the time period. As you're looking at documents, reading diaries, um, reading records, reading the census records, you're looking at people's names, but you're not necessarily visualizing where they live. And so maps can help you visualize the area where your ancestors were living during a particular time period. And what the maps also do is they help you trace the development of transportation routes. As you know, the transportation routes changed from the 17th century to the 18th century to the 19th century to the 20th century. It's constantly expanding here in the United States of America and around the world. And if you use maps from each century, you can certainly trace the development of transportation routes, giving you a better idea of how your folks moved across the country or across the world. Maps also help you trace the decline of a village or a town as industries change, move, as transportation routes change. I'm one example that comes to mind is in the 18th century, there was a town called Marlborough, um, up in Northern Virginia, and it was a flourishing town. Actually, had a racetrack. There was actually a brewery there, and then it collapsed when uh, towards the end of the 18th century, after the American Revolution, because its port silted up. So if you were to drive there today, you may not have an idea that that was once a fairly flourishing town, but it was. And so maps can assist you in identifying perhaps a village or a town that existed once, or where industries were located at one time. For example, in doing the work for the exhibition that's currently up at the Library of Virginia, Mapping the Commonwealth 1816 to 1826, which is up until June 7th, 2025. I had to put a plug in for that. We have several manuscript maps on display that were completed under the direction of John Wood and Herman Boyer. Well, on one of those, the map for Patrick County shows two gun factories, shows the location of two gun factories in Patrick County in 1820, in 1821. I doubt you can find those gun factories there today, but it just want to say it may show an industry or factory that existed. A map might show where they existed at a particular time in history. So they also help identify migration routes. You can, as you look at maps and as you try to figure out how people were moving, you maps help you identify barriers to migration. Barriers like dense stands of forest, or rough mountain terrain, rivers, large bodies of water. They also identify where particular groups live. which may peoples and nations, which may determine which route people were traveling as they moved across the continent. And also, people choose to go to places for a variety of reasons. Just remember that. I mean, they choose to go to places for a variety of reasons, and the reasons are not always rational, which you may have found in your research and working with some of your folks. The reasons for moving are not always rational. People migrate for many reasons, and they don't always go where you think they should go, or ask why didn't they go. They don't always go where you expect them to go. And migration is both ways. Someone can travel west, they can also travel back east. Someone can travel north, they can also travel back south. It is bidirectional, multi-directional, and it's people rarely travel without stopping. So as people migrated and moved, it was not uncommon for them to stop at a location for a few years, work, and then move again. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the New England example, where folks would move from New England down to New York. The next generation would move down to Pennsylvania, down into North Carolina, etc. Every 20, 30 years, you would see another generation move. So you have that occurring too. And also, people moved in groups. They didn't necessarily move independently or by themselves. So families, individuals tended to move in groups. And Carrie Eldridge, which I'm sure there are folks in this room tonight who have looked at her stuff, Carrie Eldridge has published a group of atlases that focus on migration trails. So if you're interested in researching that topic a little bit more, her name is Carrie Eldridge, and we do have her books at the Library of Virginia. So she might be a good resource for some of you to check out. So maps can also help you figure out where to find records. They can help you determine where a county courthouse is located. That can be difficult. I mean, at times, if you're trying to figure out where records were kept, a map can show you where a county courthouse was located. They can show you what county boundaries are, and how they changed. For example, in the exhibition, there are maps showing counties as they were in 1820. Well, counties were formed from those counties, and so the county boundaries have changed since 1820. And that was very apparent as I was geo-referencing several of them to try to figure out where their boundaries were in 1820 versus today. It's very different, and it was a lot of fun trying to geo-reference them. It took some time. You can also, it helps you figure out, well, helping to identify where to find records is helpful because, as you know, county boundaries change. If you're researching someone in a particular county and all of a sudden you can't find them, it could be that their location has become a part of another county. And so you need to check that county's records for them. And in Virginia in 1871, all municipalities incorporated as cities or independent cities, even if they are the county seat. And as you guys know, in Virginia, the county system dates back to the colonial period. In New England, they have township systems, but here in Virginia, it's very much a county government system. Maps can also help you identify changes in property and land ownership. They can help you identify topographical features. I can tell you that the topographical features for the Virginia Peninsula and the Williamsburg and James City County area are very different today than what they were 200 years ago or 100 years ago. And maps can help show the shift and the changes in how the landscape looks. And then they can also help show a sense of community during a particular time in history, where people were working, what industries were present. They can provide insight into the culture of a particular area, and they can also reflect the tastes and the perceptions and the prejudices and the prides and the biases of the map maker and the biases and beliefs of a particular of an era. So just keep that in mind as well. They reflect the era in which they were created, and they can all and they can and do reflect the biases, the beliefs, and the prejudices of the map maker. So just keep that in mind as you look at them, which means that yes, they can be used as propaganda tools. So just keep that in mind as well. They can be used as propaganda, and they can also be used to project what someone thinks as their territory, or what a nation thinks of as their territory. They can project that as well. For example, 18th century British North American maps are well known for demonstrating French control of North America, Spanish control, British control, and to the extent that they control territories and areas. But guess what? There were a lot of First People nations very present that were dominating the area that are not demonstrated or shown on those European-based maps, but they are there. And so those maps from a European perspective project European biases and hopes and dreams and are not necessarily correct. So that is something that you always do need to keep in mind. Maps also can show footprints for towns, cities, and large farms and plantations. They can do that. And let's take a look at how to read a map. And this won't take long. If you've done this, you already know what I'm going to say. If you use maps all the time, this is not going to be new. For example, Tom Crew, who worked at the Library of Virginia for many years, is very familiar with how to read a map. But let's take a few minutes explaining how a map is constructed and how you can read it and how you might want to approach it as you do your research. So as you take a look at this beautiful map from 1850, it's a map of Virginia with its canals, roads, and distances. And it's a lovely map. I don't think we have the 1850 publication at the Library of Virginia, but we certainly do have a map very similar to this that's online in our digital collections discovery portal. So I can't remember if you can find this exact one, but you can find one very similar to it. So a map has a collar, and the collar is, well, let me go back a page. The collar is that area between the map's border and the edge of the paper. And so that's the collar. And the collar region looks blank, but oftentimes they can provide a very helpful information as you conduct your research. You might find the name of the copyright holder. You might find the names of additional people who helped craft and compile the map. You may also find grid tick information that might provide coordinates that you need. And it might even include source citations. So as you look at a map, make sure that you're not looking just at the map of the colony or the county or the country you're researching, but make sure you look beyond that to see if there's any helpful information that you might need later and keep for your records. So the title is it's what jumps out, especially in 18th, 17th, 18th, 19th century maps, even 20th century maps. The title is what jumps out. It's the publishers and creators have the title there to grab your attention, and they have to succinctly tell you what the map is about within that title. So the titles tend to be succinct and descriptive. And if you want to look at a really descriptive title, go look at a 17th or 18th century map. Some of those titles are very descriptive. So they tend to be easy to find. They tell you the theme. And in older maps, the titles can be in an elaborate cartouche. And some of the cartouches are beautiful. They surround the title, and they have iconography, the figures surrounding it to help explain or to explain to the viewer what the map is about. The creator. The creator information can oftentimes be found underneath the title. This information can also be found in the collar sometimes. So if you're trying to figure out who created the map, always look below the title, but also look at the collar. And sometimes they're included in the legend. So they're not always in the same spot. Now, the scale. The scale is one of the most important pieces of information because the scale helps to tell you the map size as it relates to the size of the rest of the world. The map size as it relates to the size of the real world, I guess I should say. And a large scale map provides you with small details like the location of a courthouse or a cemetery or a footprint for somebody's property. A large scale map provides the smaller details. But a smaller scale map gives you larger details, meaning you're moving away from that close detail and you're looking at perhaps a state with its transportation network or the United States of America with its transportation networks. Those are smaller scale maps that are providing larger details. So a large scale map zooms in, a smaller scale map zooms out. And the scale can be represented as a scale of miles. It could have a bar scale. It could also have fractions. Oftentimes you will see 1:24,000. That just means the 1 is 1 inch equals 24,000 inches on the ground. So if you see something like 1 colon and then a large number, that's normally 1 inch equals that many inches on the ground. And if you need to, you can always take a ruler to the scale of miles, take that, measure the area you're researching, and then take it back to the scale of miles to see how many miles are being covered. That is a nice thing about having a bar scale or a scale of miles. You can use your ruler. It really does help you out. So the legend can include a lot of information. Include important information like how you need to read the map, what the symbols mean. And the symbols it could be a line, it could be a shape, it could be a color, it could be any kind of visual representation that represents something on the map. And in the instance for this particular map, canals are shown with a black line, railroads have a red line, the capitals have a specific symbol, and then leading roads look a particular way. And so in order to understand what you're reading, you really do need to read the legend or the explanation. And as you can see, for example, on this map, it's not called the legend, it's called the explanation. And I just, that sounds silly to say, but, as you're looking at a map, what we would call the legend may not always be called the legend. But what the legend does, it explains what the symbols are on the map, how to read them, and what they stand for. And then down towards the bottom, the border oftentimes includes the longitude and latitude that you need and the coordinates. Today, we're so fortunate to have Google Maps, Apple Maps, mapping systems, ArcGIS, and to where we can plop in the coordinates and then it will bring up the area that we're researching. With these maps, you have to look at the maps themselves and look at the area outside the map, beyond the neat line a little bit, to look at what the longitude and latitude is. And today, Greenwich is the meridian. And so we know that the longitude starts at Greenwich, England. Well, Greenwich wasn't set as the prime meridian until later in the 19th century. And so if you're reading 18th, 17th, early 19th century maps, keep in mind that the prime meridian may be a major city like Washington, D.C., Paris, or London, which will change the longitude degree mark. So just keep that in mind. Um, just keep that in mind. And again, in the collar area, look at what this map shows. It shows the date of its creation. It also names the person who owns the copyright to the map, who owns the rights to the map. And then, of course, maps often include a compass rose, and the compass rose can vary from map to map, but it shows you the direction, the orientation of the map. The map's orientation is oftentimes identified by a compass rose. And they can vary, and some of them can be quite beautiful. In fact, the compass rose from one of our copies of the Fry Jefferson map of Virginia is frequently requested as a graphic in publications because it is so attractive. So the types of maps to use in genealogical research. Tonight I'm going to focus mainly on government-produced maps, like military maps. And for the purposes of this talk, we are focusing on American Revolutionary War and American Civil War military maps. Topographic maps, which at first glance can look really boring unless you're a researcher. And then you realize they're chock full of information that you really need. Nautical charts and U.S. Coast Survey charts. Why nautical charts? Well, they tend to focus on coastlines and creeks and rivers along the coast and can be very, very detailed. And so if you're researching folks who lived along the coastline, you can check out that U.S. Coast Survey or a nautical chart. Aeronautical charts. Why am I recommending aeronautical charts? Well, in the 20th century, people started to move not only by train and automobile, but also by plane. And so if you may at some point need to check an aeronautical chart if you're researching someone who is moving about in the 20th century. And then Virginia highway maps. Virginia did not come out of the mud until 1932. It's a very important date. And even then, we could quibble about if they actually came out, if we came out of the mud in 1932, but we started moving out of the mud in 1932. But most of the first highway maps were published, Virginia highway maps were published in 1922, and then the county maps were published beginning in 1932. And then postal route maps. The United States of America had the best postal system in the world in the 19th century. And you'll oftentimes find maps from the 19th century that notes post route maps, stage road maps, because stage roads were used to deliver the mail. And Alexis de Tocqueville commented on how well informed Americans were, even those Americans who lived on the frontier. Well, it's because they had access to a post office, which means they had access to newspapers, magazines, and getting the local gossip in the post office, which could also be a tavern or a shop, etc. So, and then I can talk about it another time, commercially produced maps, which can include state and county maps, immigrant, traveler, and railroad maps, fire insurance maps. But we're just going to look at government produced maps for this evening. And the first section I want to talk about type or military maps. And military maps can be really descriptive, and they can also provide wonderful topographical information. This particular map was done by a French cartographer during the American Revolutionary War, and it's of an area in James City County that includes Green Springs Plantation. And so this dates to about 1780, I would say. There is a legend, it is in French, and this is something I have to caution when you are researching maps, especially you may have to use Google Translator. I use Google Translator frequently to help determine um, what's been stated or what's been printed on a map. Um, that's French or Spanish or Dutch, um, or in some cases even Greek. So Google Translator has come in very, very handy, and Dutch. So just keep in mind you might have to pull out a Google Translator or upload it to translate maps. This one is a manuscript map, and it's in the Library of Congress collections. And I believe this is in the Rochambeau map collection, and you can go online and look at that if you so desire. But as you can see, it provides topographic information. You can see the roads, you can see the creeks coming, flowing into the James River. And later ones tend to also show where landowners lived, property boundaries. You can even figure out where a footpath was located, bridges, ferries, mountain passes, what the landscape looked like. And here is a, well, next page, I guess. Symbols will vary on this. And some helpful tips for looking at military maps. Check the legend if one's available. Have a magnifying glass with you. Never a bad idea. But have a magnifying glass with you if you're looking at a paper map. And relief. Oh, this is important. Relief will most likely be shown by hatchers and not contour lines. And how can you use these? Well, you can determine where your ancestors may have lived. You can see what roads and waterways were being used. You could find the location of a county courthouse. Cultural information, and cultural information can include industries in the area, factories, mills, where people were living, the major roads in use, peach orchards, etc., cornfields, wheat fields. They can assist you in determining those. And then here is a copy of the map zoomed in. And then you can see Green Springs Plantation, which is where one of our colonial governors lived, and the roads connecting it to Necco Land or Neck Lance. For those of you who live in James City County, Williamsburg area, there's a road called Necco Land Road. Well, here you go. Here's an older map showing Necco Land Road around 1780. You can also see the position of the English Army in the area as well. And Mr. Humbler's plantation. But also take a look at the footprints that's being shown. Mr. Wilkinson's plantation is further up. You see footprints of property, buildings on his property. And if you look, if you go back to Green Springs Plantation, you can see a footprint of the buildings on that site as well, which I think is pretty nifty. And here's another one from the Revolutionary era. This is probably right around the time of the Battle of Yorktown. And here you're getting a good view of Southside Tidewater, Princess Anne, Norfolk counties, portion of Newport News and Hampton. There are several familiar place names present for those of you who have lived in the area or have visited the area or familiar with the area. Some of the names on here are very familiar. They're still in use today. What I found very interesting during my researches for my dissertation is that there was a customs house in Hampton prior to the American Revolution. So if you ever hear mention of a customs house in the Tidewater area, there's a good chance that they're referring to the one in the small town of Hampton, Virginia. And you'll also notice on this map, and in even maps from the Civil War era, they always note the location of the halfway house on the peninsula, which connects to Yorktown and then eventually to Williamsburg. But you see that frequently. So it was a fairly consistent route in use in the 18th and 19th centuries. So here's an example of a Civil War map, vicinity of Petersburg. It is what I think a map that we would call a salt print, which means it was reproduced in the field for use, meaning that they had a technique to reproduce a map to be distributed. And this one's also been dissected so that it can be folded and carried around. And oftentimes these salt prints were distributed to officers, and occasionally you will find one that doesn't look great, or one that was in someone's saddlebag for so long and the mildew set in and you can't get it out. We do have a copy of one like that at the Library of Virginia that was donated to us in the 1930s. But here's a close-up look at this. Again, it's providing topographical details, a lot of roads, waterways, and then it's just teeming with place names and the names of residents who could be landowners, and they could also be renters. But armies marching through in the field needed this type of cultural information. Where is the location of a shoe factory? Where is the location of an orchard? Which road do I want to use? What's the name of the road? Do I have the right name of the road? There's a couple of good stories about what happened in Henrico County during the Civil War because they didn't have the names of the right roads. But anyway, that's another story. So, topographic maps. They don't look fancy, but they can really be helpful. And the United States Geological Survey was established in the 1870s and began producing topographic maps. The idea was to map the United States, map its topography, identify the nation's geology, and individuals who work with us a lot have identified up to 800 uses for topographic maps. So they can be used for a wide variety of reasons, and they can provide information about shorelines, vegetation, roads, railroads, route numbers, schools, churches, public buildings, boundary lines, fence lines, and the users vary. Archaeologists use them a lot. In my time at the Library of Virginia, and before TopoView was available through the United States Geological Survey, people came in frequently to look at our topographic maps, and archaeologists were one of our highest users in addition to genealogists, because you can trace the changes in an area throughout the 20th century. Now, what's important about topographic maps is it helps to know the name of the quadrangle, because topographic maps, let me go back, each inch covers 24,000 inches on the ground. So each inch on the sheet of paper covers 24,000 inches on the ground, which means they really are large scale maps. And so as for example, Virginia was mapped, the 1 to 24,000 maps, they were, each section was mapped. It was given a name and the name of the quadrangle. And the example of a quadrangle is what we're looking at on the screen right now. The quadrangle could be named for a specific feature in the area, or it could be named for a specific city or town. So make sure that you know the name of the quadrangle, which way back in the day, you'd have to look at a book to help you figure that out. But now, if you go on TopoView, provided by the United States Geological Survey, you can type in the area you're researching, and it will help provide the name of the quadrangle that you need to look up. And it will also provide copies of the topographic maps for you to download. So they tend to be JPEGs. You can get GeoTIFFs, PDFs, etc. So topographic maps in 2024 are readily available. And for Virginia, you can find them for some localities dating back to the 1880s. And they are currently they are always updating topographic maps. And that's something important to remember about topographic maps. The dates, often that you might find several dates on a topographic map, the date that it was originally published, and then the date it was revised. And that information normally is in purple. And if it's photo revised. If it says photo revised, it had the information on the map was not checked in the field. It means it was not checked on the ground. It was just checked with aerial photography or satellite imagery today. Just helpful hints to keep in mind. And the symbols, there are so many symbols that can show up on a topographic map. We actually have a book or two at the library that helps explain the topographic map symbols. And so I went ahead and photographed it for this PowerPoint presentations, but you can just take a look at the numerous types of symbols that you can find on these things. Mangroves, scrubs, wooded marsh, woodlands, a dry lake bed, glaciers. If that happens to be an area where you're researching, I don't know. But you know, what telephone lines looks like, power transmission lines. There's a lot of information that you can find on these maps, and that information is depicted with the use of symbols. And if anybody's interested in calling this down, I think I can find the citation for this record, for this book in the collection. Okay, so useful tips, check to date. The quadrangle may have gone through several revisions. Relief will be shown with contour lines. Know the name. They're drawn at different scales. Today, they're mainly 1 to 24,000, but you might find some at smaller scales, meaning, you know, larger area, less detail. And, you know, you can compare changes over time. You can see urban development or urban decline, roads and waterways in use. Help you locate towns and railroad depots and villages. But again, you know, they could change, you know, which can change over time. And the topographic maps help to help you trace that. Cultural information, you can understand an area's topography, types of employment in the area. So nautical and U.S. Coast Survey charts. Nautical charts are not necessarily government publications, but it just made sense to put them in with U.S. Coast Survey charts. Nautical charts are, you know, for people who were sailing along the creeks, inlets, bays, and the oceans. And in the 18th century, 17th century, there was something called the English Pilot Book, or the American Pilot Book. I think I've got that correct, or Coast Pilot. Anyway, those booklets provided detailed information for sailors, and also they included maps as well. And they could include really detailed information, but you have to remember that they were for sailors and watermen and not necessarily for us. And they only provide information within a half-mile to 3 miles inland. So it can be very detailed information, but only within a half-mile to 3 miles of inland. So that's just, you know, something important to keep in mind as you use these. And how to use them? Again, find detailed information within 1/2 to 3 miles of a major tributary. And also they can be helpful in providing the soundings in a particular area as well. Cultural topographic information. And then here's an example of one from the American Revolutionary War era. It was done, this was completed after Norfolk burned in 1776. I know that because it's notated on the map. Norfolk burned 1776. And these tend to have notes on them to help researchers. Yep, there we go. Norfolk burnt January the 1st, 1776, down there towards the bottom. But you have directions for sailing into the James River, which could be very helpful. And the directions are fairly specific. Where to look, where you will go, could be very, very beneficial, especially if you're not familiar with the area and where the sandbars are. Um, and then this is an up-to-date, well, I shouldn't say up-to-date. This is a Coast Survey chart of San Francisco. And I believe it's the 19th century. But you have soundings. And then, as I said, it provides really detailed information within a mile to 3 miles of the coastline or a major waterway. But there is San Francisco in the 19th century. And just look, it even includes footprints, the buildings that were in San Francisco. And then look at they're using contour lines to show you the elevation. And Lombard Street is there. I don't know if anyone's driven up or down Lombard Street, but that's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's really windy and it's just a lot of fun. And here is a larger detail of the Coast Survey chart of the city of San Francisco. This too you can find online, just as the United States Geological Survey has topo view. NOAA NOAA has historic charts online, and so that's where you can download historic charts like this, is through NOAA's historical chart collection. Aeronautical maps, believe it or not, in the field of cartography, these are a thing. People are researching aeronautical maps. And so what can you find? Well, these are mainly for 20th century and 21st century, but flight information, a lot of it's going to be specifically for pilots, the only ones who can really read it, but so keep that in mind. Restricted or private use airports, abandoned airports, heliports, symbols, topography, power plants, open air theaters, roads. And why all of this is because these are landmarks that pilots would be looking for as they're flying across the country. They weren't using instruments until the 1930s, so a lot of pilots flying in the early part of the 20th century were flying by sight. And so it was very important. They would oftentimes follow the railroad lines as they flew across the country. And it was very common for directions and names to be painted on the roofs of barns and buildings. So as pilots were flying over, they would be able to see where they were. So it's intended to help pilots. Detailed information for flight paths. It's how people are traveling in the 20th century. And this is an example of an air navigation map by the Coast Survey, which was published in 1923. And notice that there is a red area with lines. Well, the explanation says prohibited area. I think that's Cheatham Annex, which is still prohibited area on the Virginia Peninsula. But you can see, localities and towns are in yellow. And then it also shows you where Army, Navy, Marine Corps fields are located. So if you have someone stationed in the area in the 1920s, you've got a good idea of where they may be, living. Of course, it shows the railroad lines too, but and of course, the explanation nicely helps identify the symbols and what they mean. That's very, very helpful. And then, of course, this is from 1916. This is from a magazine published in 1916, and it shows the air route from Newport News to New York City. And so I wasn't able to include the section from Baltimore to New York City, so I was able to show Yes, I know it should be arranged the other way, but I didn't know how else to do it at the time. Um, and so you can see Newport News, and you can see the flight pattern from Newport News, and where it picks up with uh, Baltimore at some point. But you can see the flight patterns, and you can see the areas, the place names that have circles. Um, I some of those I think are railroad depots slash post offices slash localities. I'm not quite sure because there wasn't really anything on the map that explained all that. So I'm guessing. Um, and let's see. Okay, we are almost to the end. I thank you for sticking with me, staying with me. Virginia highway maps. 20th century. What can you find? Well, state and county roads. And remember, a lot of state and county roads have were old wagon roads, which were once um, trails and roads for First People nations, possibly also animal trails. So just remember, state and county roads, especially the major ones that are in use, may very well have been built upon an older road or close to a trail or an older road used in the 19th century, 18th century, or 17th century. These maps are very helpful because they could tell you the road condition and type, which you can see in this legend below. Mail routes, school bus routes. You might have come across someone's diary that discusses their school bus route. Well, if it's in the 20th century, you may be able to find a map that shows you that route. Um, Ferries, airports, railroads are also noted on this, and also schools and churches. And again, just take a look at the legend. The colors are very important. Um, and this is also helpful to keep in mind. There are county maps, but true road maps in Virginia, true highway maps really weren't published until 1922. And then it wasn't until 1932 that the first primary and secondary highway road atlas was published. So you really don't find a really good county, primary county, primary and secondary road maps until 1932 for Virginia counties. And that's when it's in 1932 that most counties ceded control of their roads to the Virginia Department of Transportation. And there were three counties that did not, and one of them was Henrico County. They continue to maintain their own primary and secondary roads. And as I said, read the legend. And also keep in mind that the roads were not always paved or in great condition. So you can imagine what traveling was like for people. Um, so, it's pretty obvious how you can use these maps that shows you how people were traveling and moving in the 20th century. And this is an up close. The red tends to show highway roads with hard surfaces that have been improved. I think the sections that are in blue are highway roads that have been improved but are not hard surfaces. And the other roads that are I think in yellow may be unimproved roads. But um, you get a sense of how people could travel um, through the Commonwealth in 1922. And then here is a copy of a section of an Accomack County secondary and primary map from 1932. And this is of Accomack County, and you can see the major primary and secondary roads, and you see a lot of place names. And so this is almost 100 years old. This is from the 1932 atlas. But this is the kind of information and detail that you can get from those primary and secondary highway atlases. And then postal route maps produced by the United States Post Office. They're pretty basic. Railroad lines, railroad stations, major roads, post offices no longer in service, and the earliest ones date back to the 1790s. And so the Library of Congress has a few of these online on their website. I know that they have the post route map of the United States from 1796 on their website. Abraham Bradley was a postmaster. Um, but they're very useful because they show the major roads in use, and they also give you a good idea of how Virginians were traveling through Virginia into Kentucky through the Wilderness Gap and through the Cumberland Gap. And that's one reason why I like the 1796 post route maps, because they're showing you how people are moving through the Appalachians and through the Blue Ridge. Of course, political boundaries, but look at the legend. It says they explain the roads being used. They can explain mail service. Um, and again, emphasis is on railroad stations and post offices. But that can be very helpful because sometimes when you're reading someone's letter, their location is noted by the post office. Census records might notate where a census is being taken by a post office, etc. So it's helpful. And and there you go. No road condition information, no topographical detail. But how can you use these maps? Well, post offices, find old roads and railroads that are no longer in use. And just keep in mind, post offices, you pick up your mail there, but it's also where you would meet with people to catch up on local gossip to get the news. And for people who were serving as state representatives in state government or as congressional representatives in Washington, D.C., the post office would be a place to meet with people, to stump, to give speeches. So they really were important gathering places um, in the 19th and early 20th centuries. And we had the best system in the world at one point, best postal system in the world. So, and this is through the Library of Congress website. This is early 20th century. And oftentimes with these post route maps, they include Virginia and West Virginia. That's very common for them to do that, is to include Virginia and West Virginia. For post routes maps published after 1863, you almost always find the two states together. And then here's an explanation of the mail service. It's and the different lines and colors show how often the mail was delivered on that particular route, or which one was a special supply route. Right? It's helpful cultural information. It helps you to understand the culture and the time period in which Americans were living. And here we go. You can see in the background railroad lines. You can also see county boundary. This is in Northern Virginia, in case the place name Manassas didn't give it away. And the circles tend to identify the location of post offices. So you may be able to have some fun with these. And then last but not least is this beautiful map of Henrico County that was completed by John Wood, or under John Wood's supervision in 1819. I had to put this plug in because if you're researching Virginians around 1820, the Wood Boyer maps can be very, very helpful. And this one is on display right now in our gallery in the exhibition. If you want to come to the Library of Virginia to take a look at it, it is on display. And as you notice, Richmond is mentioned, but then you can also see the roads and the rivers and place names. And if it's not this one, it's the other one from Henrico County that we have done that was a part of this project that shows coal pits in western Henrico County. And when you get to see these up close, you'll notice that there are some familiar roads mentioned or shown, like Three Chop Road, Short Pump, the Tavern at Short Pump, and yeah, some familiar place names will be present. But these maps, like the other maps we've looked at, they're manuscripts. They are made for a larger mapping project, but they provide you with the names of peoples, cultural information, industries in place, factories, post routes, stage roads, waterways, because in Virginia, people were using the water to travel um, through a good part of the 19th century. So it's always important to know the waterways in the United States and in Virginia. So, where can you go to take a look at these? Well, here's a list of places where you can find maps. When I say you can find maps, you can find them online. USGS TopoView is a great place to get topographic maps. NOAA's Historical Chart Collection is a great place to get historical charts. The Library of Congress has the largest map collection in the world, so always need to check there. We, of course, specialize in Virginia history and Virginia maps. The David Rumsey Map Collection has a wonderful collection of 19th century maps from around the United States and the world. But the David Rumsey Map Collection, really strong for those of you who are interested in 19th century map research. Always check with your local public library to see if they have access to like Sanborn maps, fire insurance maps, which I could always discuss later with you guys if you think I should come back. And if you're doing colonial American research, check out the United Kingdom National Archives and the British Library. As many of you know, the British Library was hacked, and so a lot of their online materials and what was on their catalog, it's not the same experience researching them as it was before October of 2023. But prior to that, you could access a lot of maps online through the British Library website. And at one point, you could actually access King George III's map collection through the British Library website, which was pretty nifty. And the National Archives, UK National Archives, it's hit and miss as to what's online and available digitally. I don't know if any of you are associated with a college or a university, but if you are, you may want to see if they subscribe to a database called the Adam Matthews database. That database includes digital images of documents and maps and records from the Colonial Records Office. And it's wonderfully helpful if you are researching British American colonial history and the West Indies too. So, yeah, I think it's a good thing that I stopped halfway through. So let me stop sharing my screen.
It's definitely easy to get carried away when talking about maps. Speaking of UK, this was a question from earlier, but she said if you're searching in the UK, the Ordnance Survey collection is amazing.
It is.
All right, so let me go back and ask some questions. You were talking about topographic maps and said that you would find hatchers. So the question is, what are hatchers?
Hatchers, they show height elevation with the use of lines. It looks like a hatcher. Cross stitch, for example. And contour lines are like lines that go around and they have the elevation. If you go back and look at a topographic map, they show contour lines. If you go back and look at an 18th or 19th century military map, they're going to show elevation with hatcher lines, just cross stitch or just hatchers, but
okay.
not a contour.
Okay. Did you call the Civil War map a SALT map? She couldn't. She said I couldn't catch the word.
Yes, you heard me right. SALT print map. Yes.
Okay.
It's the name for the process that was used to reproduce it in the field.
Makes sense. And when talking about this, hopefully makes sense to you when you were talking about the topographic topographic maps.
Mhm.
The question is 7.5-minute map or a 15-minute map?
7.5 minute map is the one is whereas 1 inch on the map equals 24,000 inches on the ground. That's a 7.5 minute series topographic map. And you
Okay.
also have 15-minute series maps as well. Yes, but the 7.5 minute topographic maps are the ones that include the nitty-gritty detail.
So that kind of probably answers the next question is what does each inch represent? 24,000 question mark.
Oh, yeah, yes, I'm glad you asked that question. 1 inch on the map on a 7.5 minute series topographic map equals 24,000 inches on the ground in real
Okay.
life, real world.
And yes, please, for citation for the legend for topographic map, the topographic symbols. You knew you weren't going to get away with that.
No, that one I knew was coming, and I have to. I'm not going to be in the office tomorrow, so someone might want to send me an email for that, so I can remember to send the citation.
Okay. I will send you an email forthwith, and we will add it to the description of the video when we upload it. Do you have the postal route maps at the Library of Virginia?
We do. We don't have all of them, but we do have a good selection from after the American Civil War. And if you're interested in specific dates, they should be in the catalog.
Okay.
I think if you go to our catalog and type in Virginia post route maps, they should appear.
Okay.
They should. That's the operating word, should.
You were talking about how important post offices are, and just a stupid personal aside. It was very important to my great aunt, who was the postmistress for Tip Top, Virginia, and the post office was in her house.
That is yes. Taverns, stores, houses, yes.
Yep.
Newspaper offices.
Okay. Christy says, my great-great-grandmother remembered seeing the soldiers for World War I go down the James River from southern Albemarle to Richmond, as that was still the best way to get there.
That's right. And if you read people who traveled to the Jamestown exposition, the 1907 Jamestown exposition in Norfolk, they traveled by water.
Yep.
To get there.
What was the name you mentioned at the end about a collection in the UK?
Adam Matthews. It's called the Adam Matthews database. I wish we subscribed to it, but it's an expensive database to subscribe to which you can subscribe. And so right now it's mainly through colleges and universities. Colleges and universities that have a large budget, a large library budget, and have a strong colonial American program tend to provide access to students to the Adam Matthews database.
Okay. And I think
get
that's...
to it. Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm able to access it because I'm a student at George Mason University.
And I think that answers the next question. Is near the end of your remarks, you spoke about if you're associated with the university, but I didn't catch the name of the map tool, so I assume that's the same thing.
Yes, and I would say a lot of the material, the documents that are in this database are part of the Colonial Records Project at the Library of Virginia. And many of those records are on microfilm.
Okay.
So, although you may not be able to access the database, you can certainly access the records for Virginia through our Colonial Records Project.
Okay.
Which is on film, and it's not the easiest film to read, but you can get to it because that is, I mean, doing that versus flying to the United Kingdom.
Yeah, some improvement indeed. Would William and Mary count as a university that might have such a database?
Oh, I would definitely check with them to see if they have a subscription to Adam Matthews.
Okay.
I would be surprised if they didn't.
Thank you, Cassandra. You gave a very interesting talk on a topic I know little about, Twyla says.
Well, thank you for staying with me for an hour. I appreciate that. That's a long time to stick with someone who's speaking.
Well, we appreciate it, and we thank you for your time. We thank everyone for coming, and say thanks for the great questions. And we are now done, so we will send everybody off and wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. And we hope to see you again soon, Cassandra.
if you would like me to come back to talk about Section 2, I'll be happy to do so.
Sounds great.
And if you want more information about Civil War materials, you can always talk to Tom Crew, who is right there. So, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Don't put me on the spot.
She just did.
I worked with Tom Crew for many years, and if there's anybody who knows something about Civil War and how to research Virginia Civil War materials, it's Tom Crew.
Excellent.
Yes.
Now we know who to harass.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Good night.
Cassandra.
Okay. Hope to see you at the library or virtually somewhere.